Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Archaven Comics. So, things are starting to get interesting on the southern border. People are obviously in an uproar over the president's decision to send more than 5,000 troops to the border. The fact that he has declared his intention of eliminating birthright citizenship with an executive order is moving the Overton window when it comes to the issues of immigration. And the caravans themselves are getting considerably more violent. People have actually died crossing from Honduras into Mexico. They're starting to use violence against the Mexican police, and things are continuing to heat up in this regard. And it's only going to increase. It's only going to get more serious. And so, what you need to look at, what you need to keep in mind is that nations exist because of borders. That image on the Darkstream cover is Hadrian's Wall. The Great Wall of China was there to reduce the amount of barbarian immigration into the Chinese Empire. Most walls, unlike the Berlin Wall, are used to keep people out. But it's not just about walls. It's not just about walls. It's also about the willingness to use military force to defend the country. It's ridiculous to claim that the U.S. military should be stationed in over 73 different countries defending them. Why would we have any military, quote unquote, defending any other country and not defend the United States from an aggressive invasion of foreigners? Do you think that Great Britain would have fallen to Nazi Germany if Hitler had just had the brilliant idea of putting women and children on rafts? Would the British Navy have said, oh no, we can't sink these invading troop transports. There's women and children on them. It's absolutely absurd. The entire idea that has permeated United States culture for the last 50 years is totally wrong. People cannot become Americans. They do not become Americans. We have decades of proof of this. It's absolutely absurd. There's a question, can he really do it by executive order? Yes, without question. It would obviously face a number of legal challenges, but it wouldn't matter. It absolutely wouldn't matter. The thing is that Donald Trump needs to understand that the left is attacking him by any means necessary. And so he has to stop trying to negotiate. He has to stop worrying about what the optics might be. They don't matter. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if any of the European powers that were fighting in any of the past wars had decided, well, what are the optics going to look like if we shell Stalingrad? What are the optics going to look like if we bomb Tokyo? It's totally ridiculous. And so, um, you know, this commenter is correct. What's sickening is that our national enemies are using women and children to attack us. That's using human shields, without question. And the problem is that Americans don't understand that the frontier closed over 100 years ago. These people are not coming to America to become Americans. They're invading America to demand tribute. And there's an old saying about the Danegeld. Once you pay the Danegeld, you'll never be rid of the Dane. The United States brought in immigrants, brought in refugees, and all they did was encourage more. And that's why the United States is falling apart. The average IQ has fallen by as much as 8 points. The country is literally stupefying itself, instupidating itself, whatever, however you want to describe it. The country is actively lowering its standard of living, its ability to maintain its infrastructure. It is not sustainable. Animatronic says Trump understands what is politically possible better than even you. That's true, but it's not about politics. War is not about politics. They talk about war being politics by other means. That's the whole point. It's about other means. Once you're in the realm of defending borders, that's not something that you need to win support for. You either do it or you don't. And if you don't do it, then you have failed. It's that simple. Gordon says the entire West is infested with that mental state. That's absolutely true, and it's not an accident. That's a mentality that has been pushed systematically on the West by a coalition of people whose interests are intrinsically anti-Western. It's not a single group of people. It's not just the Jews. It's not just the socialists. It's not just the various immigrant peoples. It is a coalition of people whose interests are, in general, opposed to the interests of the Western people. Now, the West has brought it on itself. The fact that the West colonized these other countries, the fact that the West imposed their economic systems and their currencies and their legal systems and everything else on other countries is now coming back to bite the West. This is a normal reaction to empire. If you study the empires of the past, whether you study the Athenian Empire, whether you study the Roman Empire, whether you look at some of the Chinese empires, whether you look at the German Empire, whether you look at the British Empire, all of these empires were fundamentally weakened by the nature of their establishing their rule over foreign nations. Because it's a relationship that goes both ways. When you set up a colony in another nation, you obviously affect that nation, but that nation also affects you. That's why the Dutch have an issue with the people who obtain Dutch citizenship through living in the Netherlands Antilles or you know, elsewhere. You know, it's um, this is a historical pattern that repeats itself over and over and over again. And the logic of empire is what is now destroying the United States empire. And people say, well, you know, the U.S. is not an empire. We don't have an emperor. Well, who was the emperor of the Athenian Empire? You know, you can't name it. There wasn't one. Because an empire is not about what you call the ruler or rulers. It's fundamentally about whether one nation is ruling over a series of other nations. Let's see. Martin brings up a valid point. The Swedes never had an overseas empire. Yes and no. I mean, there was never a Swedish empire per se, but there was certainly Norman kingdoms set up as far south as Sicily. Um, you know, some of you really need to learn to not make really stupid comments like we have one. Bullshit, we aren't an empire, and we've gotten nothing from it but suffering. Both of those statements are totally false. The United States is the biggest global empire that the world has ever seen. It militarily occupies the vast majority of countries in the world. It has its troops stationed in dozens of countries. And the fact that, oh, well, they want us to be there. Well, first of all, no, most of them don't. Most of the people in those countries do not want the U.S. military there. Oh, I completely misread his comment. There's a missing comma. But anyhow, so he's right. We are an empire. But however, it's not true that we've gotten nothing from it. The elites in the United States have made an incredible amount of money off it. The American people have gotten relatively little out of it. Most of the advantage that the United States had economically was actually the result of all the other economic infrastructures, all the advanced, developed economic infrastructures in the rest of the world were destroyed during World War II. The United States had the only intact infrastructure, and naturally, they profited greatly by being able to build and sell products to all of the destroyed economies of Asia and Europe. Well, something said having an empire is not the only possible cause for being invaded. Well, obviously. I mean, how do empires get established in the first place? By invading other countries that weren't empires. You know, the fact that Sweden was dumb enough to open itself up to foreign invasion doesn't mean that empires don't end up the way that they historically end up. I mean, it's a non sequitur there. No, Sweden's not the exception to the rule. There are many countries, nations that were never empires that got invaded. But it is more common for countries that instigate military action to end up being the recipient of a military response. You know, who invaded who first? Did the Germans bring them up? Invade the Germans first? You know, did the Germans invade the Romans first, or did the Romans, you know, the invasions were going back and forth. But the point is that uh, diversity plus proximity equals war. And one of the problems is that modern travel has significantly increased proximity. Back 200 years ago, it would have been very, very difficult for people to get to Sweden from Somalia. Now, they take a plane and they're in a couple hours. So, Lucius says Romans invaded the Germans. I'm not entirely sure if I mean, the Romans definitely invaded the Celts. I'm not sure who. I'm not sure exactly who first attacked whom, but there was a lot of back and forth going on early on. The Germans had the advantage, then the Romans beat them back, and then the Germans and the Goths, etc., ended up coming down south. So anyhow, the problem is that the situation that the neoliberal world order has set up is that they've created and woven an incredible amount of diversity and put it in very close proximity to totally incompatible cultures. And that is going to lead to an insane amount of war in the next few decades. It's going to be extremely ugly. Because if you read the architects of this neoliberal world order, or the champions of it, the intellectual defenders of it, Henry Kissinger, Francis Fukuyama, they know that it's failing. Their latest books talk about it failing. But the thing that you have to recall, and the thing that you have to remember, is that there is no guarantee that any nation is going to survive. It is entirely possible that 100 years from now, some of your great grandchildren are going to be claiming to be white, and no one will believe them because you don't look white. In the same way that I'm Indian, and nobody buys that because, oh, you look white. The Indian cultures, the Indian societies, the Indian nations have been so adulterated and destroyed that people deny that they even exist. And that is a possible fate for every Western nation at this point. It's that doesn't mean that societies can't survive. The Gypsies have survived, the Jews have survived, both in transformed and adulterated forms. But they have survived, and that's also why their cultures are so insular now. But Vox, don't you know that nationalism causes intergroup conflict? Well, yes, by definition. If you actually have a group, then intergroup conflict is possible. But the groups exist. And even if you eliminated all of the existing groups, new groups will form. What caused the advance in tech while regressing in common sense? The rest of the world knows. It's hard to say. I mean, I think the real problem is too much wealth, too much peace, and too little Christianity. The idea that right and wrong are relative, that they don't exist, allows you to start questioning everything. That's when you can start saying, well, it depends what you mean by Jesus. It depends what you mean by is. And so all of these factors create, like somebody said, they create that R-selected environment where people are not even capable of the most basic, fundamental concepts required for survival. Why does Trump not just put snipers on the front of the caravan? Well, first of all, because it's deep in Mexican territory. I mean, yes, they're saying they're going to come to the United States, but they're not anywhere close yet. And so it's too soon for them to take any military action, in my opinion. Evil is just the word for the observed expression of our selected gene sets. No, that is just a very, very small subset of evil. It depends what you mean by survival. Well, truth. Survival is truth. Whatever helps you survive, that's the truth. Just ask Jordan Peterson. Peter Hitchens seems like he would agree with you. Do you agree with him that England is finished? No, absolutely not. England is not finished. England has been in worse straits. Look up the history of Alfred the Great. If you look at the situation of the West Saxons then, it was far more dangerous than England. I mean, if the English were determined, if Prince George declared crusade, they could restore England and the monarchy in a year. Remember, the English have cleared out the invaders before. In the harrowing of the North, over 1 million people were killed, and they ethnically cleansed the north of England, the Danelaw, so completely that there's actually very little genetic trace of the Scandinavian peoples in the modern English people today. This is a big surprise to everyone when they did a big genetic study of the current English population. They were very surprised to find that there was so little Scandinavian DNA. But that's what the harrowing of the North was about, and I expect there will probably be a harrowing of London in the relatively near future. What do you think of Cernovich's statement that Islam and China are the future? I disagree about Islam. I do agree about China. Islam is almost entirely dependent upon the West doing nothing. But China is one of the world's oldest civilizations. It's one of the greatest civilizations in human history, and they have the necessary cultural confidence and strength to do what is necessary in order to benefit their people. They're not susceptible to the weaknesses of the West. So the Middle Kingdom earned its name. Yeah, actually, I really enjoyed Chung Kuo, which was written by David Wingate. It kind of fell apart after the first 6 books or so, but it's a really interesting science fiction book about a China-dominated Earth, a world where China completely dominates the entire world. And so, it's going to be interesting to see how that how that come what the implications are of China's rise. And somebody else pointed out that's true. Um, the the average intelligence of the Islamic populations is not high enough for them to be a significant factor on the global level. I've started to shame my weak and cowardly family men who don't stand up now. That's true. You should. So it's going to be, the thing is, we've had a great run of peace and prosperity. We have had one of the longest runs of peace and prosperity in human history. That period of time is coming to an end. We don't know exactly how it's going to end. See, I disagree. Rebel Without a General says, damn it, Vox, why did we have to be born into such a crap time? We're fortunate. We got the chance to live and experience and enjoy peace and prosperity. Most of humanity throughout human history has not had the chance to enjoy that. But we've also learned the downside of that. And so the important thing to understand is that these civilizational cycles are normal. What we are experiencing is a cycle that is very similar to that experienced by many societies before. And so enjoy what we have while you have it, with the understanding that it's not going to last. And so it's very important that you prepare yourself mentally, physically, spiritually for the challenges that are going to come. They are coming. In many ways, they are already here. Gordon makes a good point. He says, he quotes Lord of the Rings and Frodo saying, I wish it need not have happened in my time. We can wish how we want. Actually, that's good. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times, but it is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And what we need to be is we need to be courageous. We need to be willing to do what needs to be done. If you're not willing to stand up for your faith, if you're not willing to stand up for your nation, if you're not willing to stand up for your family, then you've damned yourself. And you might as well sink into whatever hedonism most appeals to you for the limited time that you have before it all falls apart. But that's despair. And despair is a sin. Despair is wrong. Despair is pointless. Yes, Europeans have become lazy. Americans have become lazy. All you have to do is look at people. All you have to see is how fat and undisciplined and hopeless they are. But we can do better. We have to do better, and we will do better. This is not a black pill. This is a reminder of who and what you are. So don't listen. Don't be affected. Don't worry about all the baffle garble from pseudo-intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. Don't worry about the pseudo-moralistic finger waving of people who don't even believe in an objective reality. You know, there is nothing to be afraid of. There is nothing to despair about. You know, we are living in the times that are actually the interesting periods to read about when you read history. You know, history tends to have very little written about the sections like the last 50 years that we've read through. These are the times that make history. These are the times that make men great. So think of it as an opportunity. So anyhow, before I forget, you might want to check out some of our new books. This is for the intellectuals, Ship of Fools. Maybe you've heard of Yuval Harari and the bestseller Sapiens. You'll never take Harari too seriously again after you read this. And then again, if you're interested, Jordanetics, A Journey into the Mind of Humanity's Greatest Thinker is on pre-order, and that's going to be coming out next month. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream. Have a good evening.